Greetings, friends. You're on the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we'll discuss the situation in Ukraine as of December 1st, 2025. A large number of very important events occurred today, so let's get started. We'll move straight to the front overview and begin with the Zaporizhzhia direction. Well, now let's move to the line of combat contact, and we'll begin with the Zaporizhzhia sector, where the armed forces of the Russian Federation continue their offensive. We'll start with the western Zaporizhzhia direction. Today, some mapping services made significant corrections in the northern part of the settlement of Stepnogorsk. Let's look at how the map was adjusted over the past day. Here's the map on November 30th, and here's the end of December 1st. We see that the Russian army, according to various mapping services and experts, managed to completely encircle the Stepnogorsk citadel. This is the high-rise residential area in the northern part. And essentially this map configuration tells us that the Ukrainian side has lost any supply routes to the troop grouping on the citadel territory. And most likely, in the near future, the Ukrainian army will be forced to either begin a breakout retreat or withdraw, though such possibility isn't foreseen. Next, we move to the Zaporizhzhia direction, where there are also small corrections. Today, pro-Ukrainian cartographers are making a very large correction on the map between the settlements of Ravnopolye, Zatyshaye, Yablokovoye, and the P-85 highway. According to them, the Russian army is actively advancing westward with the goal of bypassing Huliaipole from the north and, apparently, with the aim of crossing and cutting the P-85 highway, running from Huliaipole toward Pokrovsk. The map was corrected today, but we simply adjusted the grey zone. This is how the map looked yesterday, November 30th, and today the map already looks like this. Information is also coming in that according to various pro-Russian experts and mapping services, the armed forces of the Russian Federation are actively advancing along the P-85 highway. Currently, the Russian army already controls approximately 50% of Dobropilya. Likely a mistake referring to the Dorozhnyanka area or Huliaipole suburbs, or a local name, and continues the offensive toward the southern outskirts as well as toward the northern outskirts of the settlement of Varvarovka. Daily, Russian sources publish footage like this, or publish similar footage. And here we can observe how the Russian side is calling on Ukrainian soldiers on Huliaipole territory to surrender. Strikes are being delivered using multiple rocket launcher systems. Sources report that over the past day, approximately 50,000 leaflets were distributed throughout the city of Huliaipole, calling on Ukrainian formations to surrender, flee, or retreat. This tells us that in the near future, the assault phase will transition to its final and most active stage, Pokrovsk direction. Next, we move toward the settlement of Pokrovsk, from where various footage is also coming. Combat operations continue both in the southern part and in the northeastern part of the city of Myrnograd. Today, footage of close combat between Ukrainian soldiers and Russian soldiers was published for the first time. This video was apparently filmed with a chest camera of a Ukrainian infantryman who was in the southern citadel of Myrnograd. And here we see close-range firefight essentially between buildings. This Ukrainian soldier's position was geolocated. The Ukrainian soldier was standing at this point and apparently was striking at southern structures or at these high-rises. Based on this footage, we're not correcting anything yet, but we simply received another confirmation that the Russian army is actively advancing in the southern part of Myrnograd, pushing out Ukrainian formations. Slightly to the north, strikes are regularly delivered on high-rise buildings using FABs and aviation. On this map, in this footage, we see another temporary deployment point of the AFU, which was struck using a FAB, Kostiantynivka direction. Next, we move to the Kostiantynivka sector, and today the most likely fantastic or unexpected, or even to some degree impossible news is coming from this direction. I remind you that the Russian army is actively storming the city of Kostiantynivka from the southwest and southeast, and we regularly receive corrections from this direction of how Russian units are actively advancing. A large amount of video material is also regularly published showing how the Russian side destroys Ukrainian equipment that enters Kostiantynivka territory with reinforcements, ammunition, and so on. But there's another Kostiantynivka direction, that is, about which we also regularly receive some news with periodicity of once every 6 months, And each time this news puts us into a certain, let's say, stupor. Today, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, like a bolt from the blue, announced that Russian units managed to break through the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine, penetrate deep into the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine, and clear the settlement of Klinovo. And today, in the Kostiantynivka sector and in the area of responsibility of the South Troop Grouping, there is only one settlement of Klinov, and here's where it's located. That is, pay attention to the entire Kostiantynivka direction. Chasiv Yar, here's Mykolaiivka, Chervone, Verolyubivka, Popasne, Bezimene, Oleksiivka, Druzhkivka, and here, Klinove. And pay attention that the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation has not published any information about clearing, let's say, Verolyubivka, or Popasne, or Bezimene, but suddenly information that they managed to penetrate deep into the defense and clear this settlement. Based on the Ministry of Defense report, without any understanding at all of how specifically Russian units entered this territory, this village, we made a correction. This, by the way, isn't the first village with some difficulties. Specifically in the area of responsibility of this grouping, some units are responsible for this sector. There were a total of 5 statements made over the past year, in 2025, or rather 4 statements, which still haven't received any confirmation in terms of geolocation. The very first settlement that was cleared in this sector is the settlement of Novomarkovka. Information about its clearing appeared, I think, back in April 2025. Most cartographers passed this sector without corrections. Nobody rushed to make them, but we corrected it because it was announced by the Ministry of Defense. A little later, approximately in August, I think, something in this time period, the Ministry of Defense reported the clearing of 2 more settlements, Markovo and Maiske. Also remember, there was such a case when the Chief of the General Staff spoke, and behind him a map was published, where we compared the General Staff map with those maps that are now publicly available. And there was already a picture showing that Maiske, Markovo and Fedorivka were encircled or already cleared. But again, no information, geolocation has been published to this day. And today, I repeat, like a bolt from the blue, the Ministry of Defense announces the clearing of Klinovo. A critically important settlement. Its importance lies in the fact that through Klinov, through the Kuzminivka ravine, until this moment at least, supply was going to such settlements as Verolyubivka, Bezimena and Popasne. And now we see that all 3 settlements may fall into a certain operational encirclement. If Russian units manage to consolidate on Klinov territory, then obviously, in case of continued combat operations, the Russian army will be able to completely clear both Verolyubivka and Popasne and Bezimena. And this, as you see, isn't simply, let's say, somewhere east of the settlement of Kostiantynivka. This is already east of the settlement of Oleksiivka-Druzhkivka and the N20 highway. From these positions, the Russian army will be able to develop an offensive both toward Kurdyumivka, possibly a mistake, closer on the map Kurtovka, Kurdyumivka, context N20, and toward Izhivka, and subsequently reach fire control over the N20 road running from Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, toward Kostiantynivka. This will essentially be again such a partial semi-encirclement, possibly even an operational encirclement of the city of Kostiantynivka. This breakthrough and situation in this sector could lead to complete collapse of the front line along the entire perimeter of the city of Kostiantynivka, which of course could facilitate the task for Russian assault troops who are now actively developing an offensive in the southern, southeastern, southwestern parts of the settlement of Kostiantynivka, Siversk and Lyman directions. Next, we move to the Siversk-Lyman direction. Regarding Siversk, no serious changes. A large amount of video material is published on striking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. All temporary deployment points, FPV drone operator positions, machine gun positions are being worked over. That is, there's some preparation, some processing, with the goal of possibly starting an assault. More precisely, increasing the pace of offensive in the near future. As for the Lyman sector, there's a correction here, specifically in favor of Ukraine. Today, the main, let's say, discussions are unfolding around the settlement of Stavki. We won't watch the video material. There's already video published by the Ukrainian side, and you know that sources confirm this is fresh video. In this footage, which you can see on the map, we could see how the Ukrainian side conducts a counterattack in the area of the settlement of Stavki and restores control over its, let's say, western and apparently southwestern part. And the Ukrainian flag is also installed. Based on this video material, we made accordingly a correction in this sector. That is, the Ukrainian side conducted a counter-offensive, several Russian soldiers were captured. And this is, apparently, possibly even some kind of media attack, the purpose of which is to show control over the situation. But apparently, in the near future, the Russian side will also intensify counterstrikes with the goal of completely restoring control over Stavki again for further advancement toward Lyman. If we talk about Lyman, the work of FPV drone operators continues here, who are only engaged in searching and identifying Ukrainian positions and striking them. In this footage, we can observe how a group of Ukrainian soldiers on foot tried to enter Lyman to strengthen positions. However, this detachment was spotted by drone operators and a strike was immediately delivered against them. That is, we see that control over Lyman is complete, and entering or leaving it is quite difficult. Kharkiv Oblast, Vovchansk. Next, we move to the northeastern direction, in Kharkiv Oblast. Today, a large number of corrections are also coming from here. Today, a number of pro-Russian experts made very important corrections on the map. This is how the map in this sector looked on November 29th, and for the past several days, we've been actively discussing the situation that in the near future, Vovchansk will come under Russian army control. And today, a number of sources are making corrections, according to which at least 90% of Vovchansk, and maybe all 100%, is under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. And I would also like to remind you of yesterday's video material that was published from Poleva Street territory. I remind you that yesterday the 57th Motorized Infantry Brigade of the AFU published this footage, in which we see how Ukrainian FPV drone operators strike at Russian flags installed on Vovchansk territory. One of the strikes was recorded at this point, and yesterday we already suggested that, apparently, the Russian army has already begun installing flags of the Russian Federation throughout Vovchansk, and, apparently, video material is already being prepared, according to which all of Vovchansk has come under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Also, apparently, we expect in the near future a report from the Ministry of Defense on the completion of battles for Vovchansk. Therefore, yesterday's strikes are just an attempt to slow down, let's say, Russian units and possibly prevent the announcement of Vovchansk's clearing on the eve of the negotiations between Witkov and the President of the Russian Federation, which will take place tomorrow. So we think and expect that tomorrow, possibly to strengthen negotiating positions, a lot of information will be published about the front line, starting from Vovchansk and ending with the same Huliaipole, with the goal of strengthening the negotiating positions of the Russian Federation before making a difficult decision. After 4 years, Americans are flying to Russia to finally give an answer, a positive answer to those proposals that the Americans received back in 2021. Well, we'll see what proposal they'll arrive with. However, there's a very high probability that ultimately Zelensky will not support these proposals. But that's already a story about something else. And that's all, dear friends. Thank you for watching, subscribe to the channel, leave your likes. All the best to you.